The telegram arrived 3 hours before the train did, informing the station master at Buffalo, Wyoming, that Miss Penelope Fletcher's intended host family had perished in a house fire 2 days prior. When Penelope stepped onto the weathered platform that sweltering August afternoon in 1882, clutching her carpetbag and shielding her eyes from the brutal sun, she had no idea that the life she had planned was already ashes scattered across the prairie wind. The station master, a portly man with sweat staining his collar, approached her with the kind of expression that made her stomach drop before he even opened his mouth. "Miss Fletcher," he asked, removing his cap, "I am afraid I have some terrible news." Penelope listened as he explained about the Hendersons, the family who had hired her as a governess through correspondence. The fire had taken both parents and their 2 children. There would be no position, no home, no future in Buffalo, Wyoming, as she had envisioned during the long journey from Philadelphia. "Is there another family in need of a governess?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady even as panic clawed at her throat. The station master shook his head slowly. "Most folks out here teach their own children, miss. And those who do not, well, they send them to the schoolhouse with Miss Pritchard. I am sorry, but there is just no call for private governesses in a town this size." Penelope felt the platform tilt beneath her feet. She had spent the last of her savings on the train ticket west. Her parents were dead. Her brother had his own family to feed in Boston, and she had burned her bridges with her aunt after refusing to marry the 60-year-old banker the woman had selected for her. She was 22 years old, alone, and stranded in a town where the dust seemed to coat everything, including hope itself. "The next train east does not come through for 3 days, the station master continued. "There is a boarding house on Main Street, but I must warn you, it costs $2 a night." $2 a night meant $6 she did not have. Penelope had exactly 73 cents in her reticule and a small garnet brooch that had belonged to her mother. She stood there on the platform as the other passengers dispersed, watching the station master retreat to his office, leaving her completely alone. The sun beat down mercilessly. Penelope moved to the covered part of the platform and sat on a bench, trying to think. She could sell the brooch, but in a frontier town like this, who would buy it and for how much? She could try to find work, but doing what? The few stores she could see along the main street looked like family operations that would not need help from a stranger with no references and no connections. Hours passed. The sun began its descent toward the mountains in the distance, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if Penelope had not been so frightened. Other people came and went from the station. A family with 3 children, an older couple, a businessman with a leather satchel. None of them looked at her twice. As twilight settled over Buffalo, Penelope realized she might have to spend the night on this bench. The thought made her want to cry, but she forced the tears back. She had not come all this way to fall apart. There had to be something she could do. "Excuse me, miss." Penelope looked up to find a man standing a respectful distance away. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with sun-darkened skin and dark brown hair that curled slightly at the collar of his worn but clean shirt. His eyes were a striking hazel color that caught the last rays of sunlight. He held his hat in his hands, turning it slowly as if unsure how to proceed. "I do not mean to intrude," he continued, his voice low and careful. "But I have been working at the livery across the way, and I could not help but notice you have been sitting here since the afternoon train came in. Are you waiting for someone?" Penelope considered lying, but found she lacked the energy. "No. I am waiting for nothing in particular because I have nowhere to go." The man's brow furrowed. "I am sorry, I do not understand," so Penelope explained, keeping her voice as matter-of-fact as possible. The man listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "My name is Franklin Xavier," he said when she finished. "I work a ranch about 5 miles north of here. It is not much, but it is mine and it is safe. You cannot stay at this station all night. Come with me to safety." Penelope stared at him. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but I cannot simply go off with a stranger to an isolated ranch. Surely you understand how that sounds." Franklin's face flushed. "Of course, I apologize. That was poorly thought out." He paused, clearly trying to think of a solution. "What if I took you to Doc Morrison and his wife instead? They live in town. Mrs. Morrison is always saying they have too much space in that big house of theirs. They are good people. She would take you in for the night at least, give you time to figure out your situation." That sounded considerably more reasonable, but Penelope still hesitated. "Why would you help me? You do not know me at all." "No, I do not," Franklin admitted, "but I know what it is like to be alone in a place where you do not belong. When I first came out here 4 years ago, I was 17 and stupid and nearly died in my first winter because I was too proud to ask for help. An old rancher named Samuel Thornton found me half frozen in a ravine and took me in. Taught me everything about surviving out here. He died last year and left me his ranch." He met her eyes directly. "I guess I figure if Sam could help a fool kid who did not know a horse from a mule, I can at least make sure a stranded lady has a safe place to sleep." There was something honest in his face that made Penelope want to trust him. Or perhaps she was simply too desperate and tired to care about propriety anymore. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you." Franklin's relief was visible. He helped her with her carpet bag, careful not to touch her more than necessary, and led her down the platform steps. His horse, a sturdy bay mare, was tied outside the livery. He secured Penelope's bag behind the saddle and then walked beside her toward the center of town, leading the horse by the reins. Buffalo was larger than Penelope had initially thought, with perhaps 24 buildings lining the main street and several side streets branching off into residential areas. Even in the growing darkness, she could see it was a working town, practical rather than pretty. A saloon door swung open, releasing a burst of piano music and laughter. The general store was closed for the night, but light glowed from the windows above where the owners presumably lived. Franklin led her to a white 2-story house with a neat fence and a porch that wrapped around the front. Before they even reached the steps, the door opened and a woman in her 50s emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. "Franklin Xavier, is that you?" she called. "We have not seen you in town for weeks." "Hello, Mrs. Morrison. Is the doc home? I need to speak with you both." The woman's eyes found Penelope, and her expression shifted to curiosity mixed with concern. Come in. Whatever this is about, we can discuss it inside with some coffee." The Morrison home was warm and welcoming in a way that made Penelope's chest ache. Mrs. Morrison ushered them into a parlor while she fetched her husband and the promised coffee. Doc Morrison turned out to be a lean man with kind eyes and silver hair. He listened to Franklin explain the situation while Mrs. Morrison made sympathetic noises. "Of course she can stay here, Mrs. Morrison declared before her husband could even open his mouth. "We have 2 spare rooms. You will take the one at the front, dear. It gets lovely morning light." "I can pay you," Penelope said quickly. "Not right now, but as soon as I find work, I will pay you back for every night." "We will figure all that out tomorrow," Doc Morrison said gently. "For now, you look exhausted. Clara, why don't you show Miss Fletcher to her room?" Penelope stood, then turned to Franklin. "Thank you. I do not know what I would have done if you had not helped me." Franklin shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Just glad I could help, miss. I am sure things will look brighter in the morning." But morning brought no magical solutions. Penelope spent the next day walking Buffalo's streets, inquiring at every business about potential work. The general store did not need help. The hotel had a full staff. The saloon owner looked her up and down and made an offer that made her storm out with burning cheeks. The schoolhouse already had a teacher. The seamstress worked alone in a shop barely big enough for one person. By afternoon, Penelope was back at the Morrison house, fighting despair. Mrs. Morrison met her at the door with a thoughtful expression. "I may have an idea," she said. "It is not much, but Franklin Xavier came by while you were out. He mentioned he has been trying to handle his ranch alone since Sam Thornton died, but it is too much for one person. He needs help with cooking, cleaning, mending, and general household management. The bunkhouse has not been used in years, but he said he could get it fixed up for you to stay in. It would be completely separate from the main house, very proper. He would pay you $20 a month plus room and board." Penelope's first instinct was to refuse. Living at her ranch, even in a separate building, with a single man would be scandalous. But then reality reasserted itself. She had no other options, no prospects, no money. And Franklin had already proven himself to be decent and respectful. "Did he seem sincere about the arrangement?" Penelope asked carefully. "Very much so. Franklin is a good man, dear. A bit rough around the edges like most of these cowboys, but good to his core. Sam Thornton did not leave his life's work to just anyone, and Franklin specifically mentioned making sure everything was proper and respectable. He even suggested having his neighbor, Mrs. Chen, come by regularly so you would have another woman nearby." Penelope thought of the dwindling coins in her reticule, of the train east that would take her back to nothing, of her aunt's disapproving face and the elderly banker's damp handshake. "When would I start?" she asked. Franklin came to collect her the following morning driving a wagon that had seen better days, but appeared sturdy enough. He helped her load her carpetbag, thanked the Morrisons profusely for their kindness, and then they were rattling north out of Buffalo as the sun climbed higher in an endless blue sky. "The bunkhouse is not much," Franklin said as the wagon bounced along the rutted road. "But I spent all yesterday cleaning it out and making repairs. It has a good stove, a decent bed, and a lock on the door. The main house is about 30 yards away. I usually wake before dawn to start on the animals, so if you could have breakfast ready by 6, I would appreciate it. Then there is mending and cleaning if you are willing. I will handle all the outdoor work and anything requiring heavy lifting." "That sounds reasonable," Penelope said. She studied his profile as he drove. He had a strong jawline and a straight nose that looked like it might have been broken once. His hands on the reins were capable and scarred. "How large is your ranch?" "About 600 acres. I run mostly cattle, about 200 head plus some horses. It is not one of the big operations, but it supports me well enough. Sam built something good here. I am just trying to keep it going and maybe make it grow a little." The landscape rolled past, all golden grass and distant mountains. Penelope had never seen so much open space. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "You have any family, Mr. Xavier?" she asked. "Just Franklin, please, and no. My parents died of cholera when I was 16. I have a sister back in Missouri, but we have not spoken in years. She thought I was crazy for coming west." He glanced at her. "What about you? Any family back east who might be worried about where you ended up?" "A brother in Boston, but we are not close. He has his own life." Penelope looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "I was supposed to be safely employed as a governess. I wrote to him before I left Philadelphia. He will assume everything went according to plan. You could write to him now, let him know your situation has changed. And tell him what? That I am living on a ranch with a bachelor cowboy. He would be on the next train west to drag me back to respectability. She said it lightly, but there was truth in the words. Franklin was quiet for a moment. I know this arrangement is not ideal. If people in town talk, it could cause problems for you. I thought about that. If it becomes an issue, I can try to find a married couple to work the ranch, and you could stay with them. Let us see how it goes first, Penelope said. I appreciate your concern for my reputation, but honestly, my reputation was never very good to begin with. I am too opinionated for polite society. That surprised a laugh out of Franklin. Well, there is not much polite society out here to worry about. The Xavier ranch appeared as they crested a low hill. The main house was a simple wooden structure, weathered but well-maintained, with a porch and a stone chimney. Several outbuildings dotted the property, including a large barn, a smaller building that must be the bunkhouse, and various sheds and corrals. Cattle grazed in the distance. A windmill turned lazily in the breeze. It is beautiful, Penelope said, surprising herself by meaning it. Franklin's face brightened. Sam always said this was the prettiest piece of land in Wyoming. I tend to agree. He showed her the bunkhouse first. It was small but clean, with a single room containing a bed, a stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a trunk for storage. Sunlight streamed through the single window. Someone had left a jar of wildflowers on the table. Did you pick those? Penelope asked, touched by the gesture. Franklin's ears turned red. Thought it might make the place seem more welcoming. Mrs. Chen said women like flowers. Mrs. Chen was right. Thank you. He showed her where the well was, where she could find firewood, and then took her to the main house. It was cluttered and dusty, in the way of a place where someone lived but did not really care about their surroundings. Dirty dishes filled the sink. Clothes were piled on chairs. Papers covered the table. I know it is a mess, Franklin said apologetically. Sam was neat as a pin, but I have been letting things slide, been focusing on keeping the ranch running. Penelope rolled up her sleeves. Well, let us start fixing that. Show me where everything is, and then you can get back to your work. I will have this place looking proper by supper time. She spent the rest of the day cleaning. It was hard physical work, but satisfying in a way her life in Philadelphia had never been. She scrubbed dishes, swept floors, washed windows, and organized the chaos into something resembling order. Franklin came in at noon, looking shocked at the transformation, and ate the simple lunch she had prepared without complaint, even though she knew it was nothing special. That evening she made dinner using supplies from the well-stocked pantry. Fried steak, boiled potatoes, and canned green beans. Franklin ate like a starving man, then insisted on helping her wash up despite her protests. You worked all day, he said. Least I can do is help clean up after myself. They worked side by side at the sink, and Penelope found herself acutely aware of his presence. The way his sleeve brushed against her arm, the sound of his breathing, the faint smell of leather and horses, and honest sweat that clung to him. Same time tomorrow for breakfast. She asked when the dishes were done. Yes, madam, and Miss Fletcher, thank you. This is the best meal I have had in months, and the house has not been this clean since Sam passed. Just Penelope, please, and you are welcome. She walked back to the bunkhouse as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Despite everything, despite the fear and uncertainty, Penelope felt something unfamiliar settling in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as contentment. The days fell into a rhythm. Penelope woke before dawn, dressed, and walked to the main house where she started breakfast. Franklin came in dusty and tired from his morning work, ate quickly, and headed back out. She spent her days cleaning, mending his clothes, baking bread, preparing meals, and slowly turning the house into a real home. Mrs. Chen did come by once a week. A tiny Chinese woman who ran a neighboring ranch with her husband and spoke English with a heavy accent, but had a laugh that could light up a room. Her presence satisfied any concerns about propriety, though truthfully, no one seemed to care much about such things out here. Penelope had been at the ranch for 3 weeks when Franklin came in for dinner one evening looking troubled. "What is wrong?" she asked, setting a plate in front of him. He sighed heavily. "I need to drive about 30 head of cattle up to the northern pasture tomorrow. It is a full day's job, maybe longer. I hate to ask, but would you be willing to help? Help how? I do not know anything about cattle. You would not need to. I just need someone to ride behind them and keep them moving forward while I lead from the front. The horse does most of the work. You just have to stay in the saddle and yell if any of them try to break away." Penelope had never ridden a horse in her life, but she found herself nodding. "All right. I will try." The next morning, Franklin brought a gentle sorrel mare named Rosie to the house and spent an hour teaching Penelope the basics of riding. She was terrified at first, but Rosie was patient and Franklin was an excellent teacher. By the time they headed out to gather the cattle, Penelope felt reasonably confident she would not fall off immediately. The work was harder than she had imagined. The cattle did not want to go where Franklin directed them. The sun beat down mercilessly. Dust coated her throat and stung her eyes. But Franklin rode back to check on her regularly, offering encouragement and water, and gradually Penelope found a strange satisfaction in the work. When they finally got the cattle settled in the northern pasture, she was exhausted and sore, but triumphant. "You did great," Franklin said, grinning at her in a way that made her heart skip. "Natural cowgirl." "I would not go that far," Penelope said, but she was smiling too. They rode back as the sun set, talking easily about everything and nothing. Franklin told her about growing up in Missouri, about his mother who played piano and his father who was a blacksmith. She told him about Philadelphia, about her father's bookshop and her mother's garden, about how she had always felt trapped in a life that did not fit her. "You miss it?" Franklin asked. "The city," Penelope considered the question seriously. "I miss some things, libraries, theater. But mostly I think I miss the idea of what I thought my life would be. Now that I am here, I realize that life would have made me miserable." "Are you miserable here?" His voice was carefully neutral. "No," she said honestly. "I am not." Something shifted between them that day. Penelope could not name it exactly, but meals became longer as they lingered over conversation. Franklin started finding excuses to be near the house during the day. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her breath catch. One evening in late September, they were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the stars emerge. The air had grown cooler with autumn approaching. Franklin had given Penelope one of his old jackets to wear, and it smelled like him in a way that made her feel safe. "I need to tell you something," Franklin said abruptly, "and I need you to hear me out before you respond." Penelope's stomach tightened. "All right." He turned to face her, his hazel eyes serious in the starlight. "When I found you at that train station, I told myself I was just helping someone in need, and that was true. But over these past weeks, Penelope, you have become the best part of my day. I wake up looking forward to breakfast with you. I come in from the fields thinking about something funny I want to tell you. This ranch has started feeling like a home again, and it is because you are here." Penelope's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I know this is not proper," Franklin continued. "I know we have not known each other long, but I need you to know that my feelings for you are not those of an employer for an employee. I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have been since that first night when you sat on that bench trying so hard to be brave." He took a shaky breath. "I am not asking you to feel the same way, I just needed you to know." For a long moment, Penelope could not speak. Then she reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the warmth of his skin. "Franklin," she said softly, "I have been falling in love with you too. I tried not to. I told myself it was foolish and inappropriate and impossible, but it happened anyway." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. "Really, really." He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She did not. Their first kiss was gentle and sweet and tasted like coffee and possibility. When they finally pulled apart, Franklin was laughing. "What?" Penelope asked, unable to stop smiling herself. "I just never imagined when I walked over to that train station that I would end up here. With you. This happy." "Life has a strange way of working out," Penelope agreed, but life also had a way of presenting obstacles. They kept their relationship quiet at first, neither wanting to face the inevitable gossip and judgment. But in a small town like Buffalo, secrets did not stay secret long. Mrs. Chen figured it out first and gave them her enthusiastic blessing. The Morrisons were happy for them when Franklin gathered the courage to tell them. But not everyone was so accepting. Penelope was at the general store one afternoon in October when she overheard two women talking. "Shameful is what it is," one of them said, not bothering to lower her voice. "Living out there with him, unmarried. We all know what that means." "Millicent, you do not know anything of the sort," the other woman replied. "Franklin Xavier is a good man, and from what I hear, Miss Fletcher has been nothing but proper." "Proper?" the first woman, Millicent, snorted. "No proper woman lives alone with a bachelor on an isolated ranch. She is either a fool or a harlot, and I am not sure which is worse." Penelope's hands shook as she set down the flower she had been considering. She walked out of the store without buying anything, blinking back tears. She knew people would talk, but hearing it was different from imagining it. Franklin found her that evening sitting on the porch of the bunkhouse, staring at nothing. "What happened?" he asked, crouching in front of her. She told him about the women in the store. His jaw tightened. "I am sorry," he said. "I should have thought more about how this would affect you. If you want to leave, if you want to go back east, I will understand." "I do not want to leave," Penelope said firmly, "but I do not want to keep living like this either, hiding what we are to each other, pretending." Franklin took her hands. "Then marry me." "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, more confidently this time. "Not because of gossip or propriety, but because I love you and I want to spend my life with you. I know it is fast. I know people will say we are crazy. But Penelope, I have never been more sure of anything." Penelope felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Buffalo with Doc and Mrs. Morrison as witnesses and Mrs. Chen crying happily in the front pew. Penelope wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Morrison helped her make. Franklin borrowed a suit that was slightly too small in the shoulders. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Franklin kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. The gossips found something else to talk about. Penelope moved from the bunkhouse to the main house, to Franklin's bed and his life in every way. Mrs. Chen threw them a party that half the county attended, complete with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. Even Millicent from the general store came, though she spent most of the evening looking sour. That first winter was hard. Snow came early and heavy, isolating them for weeks at a time. But the main house was warm and they had each other. Franklin taught Penelope to play cards. She taught him to appreciate poetry. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. They made love in front of the fire while wind howled outside. They fought occasionally about stupid things like whether to salt the food before or after cooking, then made up and laughed about how ridiculous they were being. Spring brought new life to the ranch. The cattle calved successfully. The winter wheat sprouted green in the fields. And Penelope realized she had not bled in 2 months. She told Franklin on a warm May evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. He was quiet for a long moment, then stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "We are going to have a baby." He whispered into her hair, "We are going to have a baby." He pulled back to look at her, and there were tears on his cheeks. "I did not think I could be happier than I already was. I was wrong." Their son was born in January of 1884 during a blizzard that nearly prevented Doc Morrison from reaching the ranch in time. Franklin paced the main room while Mrs. Morrison and Mrs. Chen helped with the delivery, wearing a path in the floorboards. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he burst into the bedroom despite Mrs. Morrison's protests. Penelope was exhausted and sweaty and had never looked more beautiful to him. She held their son wrapped in a blanket, staring at him with wonder. "Franklin," she said softly, "come meet your son." The baby had dark hair like his father and his mother's delicate features. He had tiny, perfect fingers and lungs that worked impressively well based on his wailing. "He is perfect," Franklin breathed, gently touching the baby's cheek. "What should we name him?" "I was thinking Thomas," Penelope said. "After my father, Thomas Samuel, to honor Sam Thornton too." "Thomas Samuel Xavier," Franklin repeated. "It is perfect." Parenthood was exhausting and wonderful. Thomas was a demanding baby who did not like to sleep and had strong opinions about everything. But watching Franklin with their son made Penelope fall in love with him all over again. He was patient and gentle, changing diapers without complaint and walking the floor for hours when Thomas was fussy. At night, he would read to the baby from whatever book was handy, claiming it did not matter that Thomas could not understand, because it was the sound of his voice that mattered. The ranch continued to grow. Franklin hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men who lived in the refurbished bunkhouse and treated Penelope with careful respect. She managed the household and helped with the ranch accounts, discovering she had a head for numbers that Franklin appreciated. They bought adjoining land when it became available, expanding their operation. Money was never plentiful, but they always had enough, and more importantly, they had each other. When Thomas was 2, Penelope became pregnant again. Their daughter was born in September of 1886, an easier birth than her brother had been. They named her Clara after Mrs. Morrison, who cried when they told her. Clara had her mother's blonde hair and her father's hazel eyes, and a sunny disposition that was a stark contrast to her serious older brother. The years passed in a blur of love and work and family. Thomas grew into a solemn boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. Clara was wild and fearless, always climbing things and tracking mud through the house. Franklin's hair started showing threads of silver at the temples. Penelope's hands grew rough from work but strong too. In 1889, Franklin decided to build a larger house. The old one was bursting at the seams with 2 growing children, and all the accumulated possessions of their life together. He designed something bigger with a proper parlor and separate bedrooms for the children, and a kitchen that did not double as the dining room. Penelope sketched the layout on paper, and they planned every detail together. The new house took a year to build, constructed during spare moments by Franklin, the ranch hands, and neighbors who came to help. It was finished in the spring of 1890, a beautiful 2-story structure with a porch that wrapped around 3 sides and windows that let in floods of light. Thomas, now 6, insisted on carrying his sister across the threshold, though at 4 she was nearly as big as he was. Clara squealed with delight. Franklin carried Penelope across next, spinning her around while the children laughed. "Welcome home, Mrs. Xavier," he said, kissing her soundly. "I was already home," Penelope replied. "I have been home since that first night you brought me here." They stood in the empty parlor of their new house while their children ran through the rooms, their footsteps echoing off bare walls. Franklin pulled Penelope close, resting his chin on top of her head. "Sometimes I still cannot believe you got stranded at that train station," he said. "What were the odds that I would be at the livery that exact day, that I would look over and see you sitting there?" "Maybe it was not odds at all," Penelope said. "Maybe it was fate. You believe in fate now, the rational, practical Miss Fletcher from Philadelphia." "I believe in us," she corrected, "which amounts to the same thing." On Penelope's 30th birthday in the summer of 1890, Franklin gave her a beautiful leather-bound journal for writing down our story, he explained. "So the children will know how we found each other. So their children will know." Penelope started writing that very night, beginning with the telegram that changed her life and the train that brought her to Buffalo. She wrote about fear and desperation, and a cowboy with kind eyes who offered safety to a stranger. She wrote about falling in love and building a life and all the small moments that made a marriage. She filled page after page over the years, adding to it whenever something significant happened. Their third child arrived in 1892, another boy they named Samuel, who inherited his father's build and his mother's stubborn streak. He was born on the kitchen table during a spring storm with Mrs. Chen delivering him because Doc Morrison could not reach them in time. Franklin caught the baby while Penelope gripped the edge of the table, and Samuel entered the world screaming his displeasure at everything. 3 children, Franklin said later, holding the newest edition while his older children peered at their baby brother with curiosity. "We are outnumbered now. You only just now realize that?" Penelope asked from the bed where she was resting. "I have felt outnumbered since Thomas learned to walk." By the late 1890s, the Xavier Ranch was one of the most successful in the region. They ran 500 head of cattle and bred horses that were sought after throughout Wyoming. Franklin had become respected in the community, serving on the town council. Penelope started a lending library in Buffalo, donating many of her own books and organizing donations from others. Thomas, at 15, was already helping run the ranch. Clara, at 13, announced she wanted to be a doctor like Doc Morrison, who was still practicing despite being well into his 70s. Samuel was 10 and obsessed with trains. Ironically enough, Mrs. Morrison passed away in 1898, and Penelope cried for days. The woman had been like a mother to her, the first person in Wyoming to show her genuine kindness. At the funeral, Doc Morrison held Penelope's hand. "Clara would have loved that you named your daughter after her," he said. "She thought of you as the daughter she never had." "She saved my life," Penelope replied. "Both of you did. If you had not taken me in that first night, I do not know what would have happened to me." "Franklin would have figured something out," Doc Morrison said with a slight smile. "That boy was smitten from the moment he saw you. We could all tell." The new century arrived with celebration and anticipation. On New Year's Eve of 1899, the entire family gathered on the porch of their home to watch fireworks that someone set off in Buffalo, visible even at this distance. Thomas had his arm around a girl from town named Elizabeth, who he was courting. Clara was talking animatedly about a medical text she had been reading. Samuel was pestering his father with questions about whether they would have flying machines in the new century. Franklin found Penelope's hand and squeezed it gently. "Happy?" he asked softly. She looked at their children, their home, the land stretching out in all directions under a sky full of stars. She thought about the terrified girl at the train station and the long, strange road that had led her here. Happier than I ever imagined possible, she said truthfully. In 1901, Thomas married Elizabeth in a ceremony at the ranch. Penelope cried through the entire wedding, unable to stop even though she was happy. Her baby boy was a man now, starting his own life. Franklin built them a house on the eastern section of the ranch, and Thomas took over more of the daily operations, allowing his father to slow down a bit. Clara left for medical school in 1902, one of only 3 women in her class. She wrote long letters home about her studies and the casual discrimination she faced and her determination to prove herself. Penelope saved every letter, bursting with pride. Samuel, surprisingly, decided he wanted to be a rancher like his father. He had no interest in leaving Wyoming, no desire to see the world beyond these mountains and plains. Franklin was quietly thrilled. The years were not without sorrow. Mrs. Chen died in 1904, and Franklin grieved the woman who had been a friend and a connection to Sam Thornton. Doc Morrison followed her a year later, finally succumbing to the heart problems that had plagued him for years. The town erected a statue in his honor. Penelope brought flowers to it every week. In 1908, Thomas and Elizabeth gave them their first grandchild, a girl they named Penelope. Franklin cried when they told him the name, and Penelope did too. Little Penny was perfect, with wispy blonde hair and curious eyes, and being grandparents was somehow even better than they had anticipated. Clara came home in 1909 with her medical degree and a husband, a fellow doctor named James who treated her as an equal. They opened a practice together in Buffalo, taking over where Doc Morrison left off. The town was initially skeptical of a female doctor, but Clara quickly proved her competence. Penelope had never been more proud. Samuel married a rancher's daughter named Ruth in 1910, and Franklin signed over the southern portion of the ranch to them as a wedding gift. The Xavier Ranch was becoming a family enterprise, spanning hundreds of acres and supporting 3 generations. On their 30th wedding anniversary in November 1913, Franklin took Penelope back to Buffalo and the train station where they had first met. It had been updated over the years, with a new platform and a larger building, but it was still recognizably the same place. "I sometimes come here," Franklin admitted as they stood on the platform. "When I am in town, I look at that bench where you were sitting and remember how scared you looked, how brave, how beautiful." "I was terrified," Penelope said. "I thought my life was over. I had no idea it was actually about to begin. Best decision I ever made, walking over to talk to you. Best decision I ever made, trusting you enough to leave with you." Franklin pulled her close, right there on the platform in front of everyone. "I love you, Penelope Xavier. I have loved you for 30 years, and I will love you for 30 more if I am lucky enough to have them." "We are both lucky," Penelope said, reaching up to touch his face. His hair was almost entirely silver now, and there were deep lines around his eyes, but to her, he was still the young cowboy who had offered safety to a stranger. So very lucky. They returned to the ranch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The house glowed with light. Their family was gathering for dinner, 3 children and their spouses, 4 grandchildren now with another on the way. All the people they had created and the life they had built together. Penelope thought about the journal Franklin had given her years ago, now filled with their story. She thought about adding this moment, this perfect evening. But some moments were not for recording. Some moments were just for living. Franklin helped her down from the wagon and offered his arm. Together they walked toward their home, toward the noise and laughter and chaos of their beautiful, unexpected life. The same life that had started with a stranded woman, a concerned cowboy, and 5 simple words that changed everything. "Come with me to safety. She had gone with him to safety. And she had found so much more than that. She had found home. She had found love. She had found herself. Years later, when their great-grandchildren asked about the old days and how great-grandma and great-grandpa had met, Penelope would tell them the story about trains and telegrams and tragedy, about a dusty platform and a kind stranger, about trust and risk and the courage it takes to accept help from someone you do not know. But mostly she would tell them about love, about how it could bloom in the most unexpected places, about how it could grow and strengthen over decades, about how it could fill a life with meaning and joy and purpose. Franklin passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1922, at the age of 65. He simply did not wake up one morning, his hand still holding Penelope's. She sat with him for a long time, memorizing his face, saying goodbye to the man who had been her partner for nearly 40 years. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, next to Sam Thornton, who had given him his start. The entire county came to the funeral. Thomas spoke about his father's integrity. Clara talked about his kindness. Samuel simply broke down crying, unable to finish his planned words. Penelope stood at the grave long after everyone else had left, talking to Franklin one last time. She told him about every moment they had shared, every laugh and tear and kiss. She thanked him for seeing her that day at the station, for caring about a stranger, for loving her so completely. "I will see you again," she promised. "But not yet. I have more story to write first." She lived another 12 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She ran the ranch with Thomas until arthritis made the work too difficult, then spent her days reading and writing and watching new generations grow. She updated the journal regularly, adding births and marriages and all the ongoing story of the family she and Franklin had started. On a warm August afternoon in 1934, Penelope sat on the porch of the house Franklin had built for her, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. She was 96 years old, her body worn out but her mind still sharp. Thomas was nearby, gray-haired himself now. Great-grandchildren played in the yard. She closed her eyes and remembered being 22 and terrified on a train platform. She remembered hazel eyes and a kind voice. She remembered a cowboy who changed her life with an offer of safety and gave her everything else besides. "Come with me to safety," he had said. She had gone with him. And what a beautiful journey it had been.